yes.
Okay.
John,
Finally updated.
nice.
You're good. It just went live.
It is live because on my end, it's not there
It's
yet.
just starting. So yes, I do see it now. The stream's coming in.
Okay, I'm going to close that, and it's still streaming. All right,
We good to go?
we are good to go.
Great. Welcome again, everybody. I'll call the meeting to order and ask everyone to stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being with us tonight. Before we start, I actually just had a fairly quick comment or a couple of comments to share. I think most of us are aware that it's been about a year since the board has been able to convene, which is really quite remarkable. And if you're watching, you probably know that the board can only convene as a governing body in this sort of setting, in a meeting, because we are governed by open meeting laws. And so we're the only entity in the district that doesn't get together. And so I miss everybody. I miss my colleagues greatly. And I just wanted to take a quick minute to tell you why. So John, you and I are the OGs of this Board of Education. What our eyes have seen. We've been through the good, the awesome, the bad, the ugly, and the pandemic. John, to me, is quintessential Canandaigua. He knows everything and everyone. His knowledge of the workings of the district is surpassed only by his understanding of and support of our understanding of everything legal. He is a fierce advocate for constituents and his beliefs. But most of all, what I miss about you, John, is your sense of humor. He is the king of one-liners, timed perfectly, keeping us laughing. John's loyalty, he pulled the curtains for Linda Maltese's shows long after his kids were out of her classroom and up until she retired, and then did the same for Kendra Drum, is just remarkable. And so, John, I hope you will be Frida to my Terry.
Good thing we're not in the same room.
Beth and I have been friends since the day I moved to Canandaigua in 2001, and our daughters hold just as precious a friendship. Beth and I were co-Brownie leaders and often co-parents as our husbands worked very long hours. She knew pretty much everything about my life, and I desperately wanted her to join me on the board so she could know that part of my life too. Professional crier, weddings, funerals, and the 6 o'clock news, Beth has a heart of gold. I miss the way she's never met a problem she doesn't try to solve. She's an incredible team player, always taking one for our team, representing our district's needs to legislators and local board organizations. Cheryl, teacher, leader, ray of sunshine, grandmother extraordinaire, and one of the most genuinely fabulous people I know. How many districts can boast a board member who has taught in the district for decades, served as CTA president, seen more than John and me put together, served on the board, retired from the board, and come back to serve on the board again to bridge a gap year? How lucky we are to have the benefit of Cheryl's wisdom, her reverence for excellent public education and teaching, her complete reliability, and someone who is simply unflappable for so long. Michelle was born to be a leader in the field of human resources. Her perfect combination of high standards and appreciation for the imperfect beings we all are make her completely approachable and able to offer astute observations and meaningful advice on really any topic I can think of. She's generous with her time and knowledge for the benefit of the district and an advocate for all students. Her ability to articulate with passion and clarity and balance is an enormous asset to our board. Jen, a self-professed geek whose knowledge of higher education and the workforce have helped to shape who we are because of how well she articulates and models where we want our kids to go. Always ready with a word of support and encouragement, always a proponent of our people and how hard they work, always willing to share her vast experience from her teaching, her field of engineering, and her particular interest in gray matter, the ability to productively navigate the increasingly disparate points of view and opinions that haunt our country have made us better. Her selfless participation on our COVID-19 task force has also made us safer. Megan does the work of angels. She objectively has some of the most emotionally challenging and draining work days of any of us. And she still shows up whole, positive, forward-thinking, and kind always. I love her focus on mental health and her determination to see us make value the way she helps us, the way she insists that we get better every day, and the way that we support our students, staff, and families, and the way we treat people. Milton brings all of the thoughtfulness and value of a slightly different pathway through education to our district. His laser mind and work ethic catch discrepancies and errors, and his kind soul brings them to our attention in, well, the kindest of ways. Milton has a way with words and the ability to work through challenging issues and questions with a calm and caring focus. I knew he would be outstanding because Joe Del Forte would not step down from his place on the board until he found the exact right person to run. Did he ever? And Julianne, brave enough to join this crew during a pandemic, no less. Julianne's background in teaching and higher education and her devotion to the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion have allowed her to hit the ground running and be a high impact board member from the very moment she started her service. I cannot wait to be back in person with all of you. I thank you all for the work you do. I think we've all had the vegetables without the dessert this year. We've had the hard work and the feedback that sometimes heartfelt and difficult and sometimes expressed in challenging ways. And we haven't had the antidote, which is being in the buildings with our kids and our staff. And so I really commend each and every one of you for your persistence this year and for the incredible goodwill that you've shown throughout. Thank you. Jamie, all yours.
No, Jeannie, there's no way any of us could do this without you. We're going on 16 years together here. You're still my kids' emergency pickup if they ever go back to primary school. The way you keep us together, the way you've kept everyone that's come through here, the way we've worked to keep our upper corner. I'm watching YouTube, so Jamie is in our upper corner. To hit, how we all worked as a team to win the lottery with him. The only thing we are saving on Kleenex for the district not buying them for Beth, but I gotta say you are the top of our mountain.
John. Thanks, everybody. All right, Jamie, all yours.
No way I want to follow any of that, but that was perfect, just perfect. Carlin, welcome to the group, Carlin. And one thing I knew when I came here 3 or 4 years ago is I was lucky to work with some pretty special people. And so hopefully that gave you a glimpse of the people around the screen that are really special. I've learned a lot from them, and I'm hoping you'll get a chance to learn a lot from them throughout this year too. So I want to just jump right in. I'm going to share my screen. I know we don't love it when I share a screen because we can't see each other, but it's easier for me to kind of do my talking points when I have a screen to show you. So can everybody see this okay? If you give me a thumbs up just to let me know. All right, great. I really just wanted the picture of Brian Amesbury getting hit with the pie in the face. But let's just jump into this now. I want to give her updates around COVID, vaccination, how we're doing, things along those lines to start with. What we believe based on the numbers that we have right now is that as of next week, so after February break, we'll have 65% of our staff with their first vaccination at least, which is really fantastic. And none of this happens without the help from Thompson Hospital and the local Department of Health. They have been just such fantastic partners, communicating with me daily, it feels like, helping to coordinate these vaccination appointments. We've actually created vaccination call teams, and a lot of them are the people you see on the screen that are administrators, and many, many others, where when these vaccination appointments come out, we have a group text, we send it to each other, and we pick up the phone and we start calling our staff to help coordinate vaccinations for them, for the ones that want it. And so really proud of our efforts in this regard. We're still meeting regularly, weekly as a region with other school districts. And what I could tell you is today when we got on and we told how many vaccinations we needed, Canandaigua was little to none, and we were the only one in that boat. And so that's really, kudos to our staff for making that happen. want to talk about, we're showing the graph a little bit differently this week, just because it's easier to see visually, but this is our student rates, and the gray line is quarantines. Remember, quarantines is kids might have been exposed to somebody who has COVID, so they put them in quarantine. Whereas the red line is isolation. This means kids who had COVID, those known to have COVID. Coming out of the holiday break, you can see there was a little bit of a climb in both quarantine and isolation. At our peak for students, there were 24 students on one day in isolation and 75 in quarantine. And we've continued to drop ever since that peak to where we are now. Today, we have 4 students district-wide in isolation and 26 in quarantine. What you'll see is a blip here in the quarantine numbers. You probably saw our Brave Square message went out. We had 2 classes that had to move to quarantine because of a potential exposure today and Friday. And so that's the big reason you see that little jump there. If you look at our staff data, it's a little like an EKG with quarantines. What we find is sometimes it has to do with groups of them that were maybe in a place together for an extended period of time, and they were quarantined together. But you'll see it kind of rose with our staff. The peak was 10 staff members in isolation on any one given day, whereas we had 19 in quarantine was our peak. As of today, we have 4 staff members in isolation and 6 staff members in quarantine. We've gone down significantly, but again, Friday and today, just being honest, they weren't good days. The data we received and the information we received from public health, we saw a little uptick. And so I'll be really curious to see what happens with that. I know when I left work on Friday, I was so hopeful, fingers crossed, because I honestly thought we could hit 0 across the board with everybody this week. But we have this little uptick, so we need to be cautious and pay attention. But then when you combine staff and students, you can see this little rise and a slow, steady decline with both isolation and quarantine. We are trending in the right direction. All good news. In total, we have 8 people, and that shouldn't say just staff members. I'm sorry, that should say staff and students, 8 in isolation and 32 in quarantine, total staff and students. Much better numbers. In fact, these numbers are better than they were before the holiday break. So, to give you perspective. And this is just another way to look at it, where they're located. So in the primary school, you can see we don't have any staff members at the time of this reporting. And again, these are subject to change at any moment. And then 1 student. You can kind of look down and see, 4 total at the elementary, 1 at the middle, 1 at the academy, none at the CACC, 1 at the op center, and that's everybody. We don't have anybody virtual, anybody out of district, or anybody at district office right now. There's zeros at those places. So numbers are improving. Those are good things. We want to see those numbers continue to improve. I don't know about any of you, but I can speak for myself. I am getting a lot of questions from community members. Well, they're improving. Are we ready to open fully now? And I thought this would be a really important opportunity for us to talk about why we are where we are, not just here in Canandaigua, but across New York State. We really haven't talked about the origin of all of this since probably September, and it'd be a good time to revisit it. In fact, I had a phone conference with a group of superintendents over the weekend, and I reminded them of this, and I was surprised the number of them that didn't remember it, because we're dealing with so much, and information continues to change. It's hard to retain all of that, and I was just surprised that I retained it. So this is what I remember, and this is what we pulled today from our archives. On July 13th of 2020, the New York State Department of Health, they released their reopening guide, right? It was like a 20-some page reopening guide, and we dug into it. And there was a lot of ambiguity around the language. They were using the word should and shall, must was also thrown in there amongst the should. And what did all that mean? It was really confusing. And you can see here around face covering, specifically appropriate PPE means at least an acceptable face covering, which is strongly recommended to be worn by all individuals at all times, but is required to be worn at any time or place that individuals can't maintain appropriate social distance. That was confusing. So are you telling me we can be less than 6 feet social distance but we have to wear a mask, and then greater and they don't have to? It was very confusing. And then it goes on below here to say that we need to ensure that appropriate social distancing to protect against the transmission of COVID when on school grounds and in school facilities. A little contradictory. And so we were calling the governor's office and me included, superintendents, were calling everybody and saying, what does this mean? Help us interpret it. And we weren't getting much answer. So New York State Education Department also released a guidance document that was equally kind of vague and ambiguous just a couple days after this one, on actually July 16th. But because we really still needed to know what did this mean, the New York State Education Department did contact the governor's office and did get a response, they thought. And on the 17th of July, they released this statement. You can see up here, based on clarification from the governor's office regarding the intent of the New York State Department of Health guidance on the 13th, we're providing the following clarifications. And look at this here in bold. It says you must social distance 6 feet or barriers or masks and face coverings. There were ors. They said, we talked to the governor's office and they said it's or. You don't have to do both. And so at that time, schools started saying, okay, I think we can fully reopen then. If people just need to wear a face mask and or a distance, one of the options we can entertain is just wearing a face covering and bring everybody back. And we went to work again, planning our reopening plans until on July 22nd, the New York State Education Department, again in red this time, released another FAQ. Upon further discussion with the governor's office, schools must ensure that appropriate social distance, 6 feet or barriers, is maintained between individuals while in school facilities and on school grounds. This includes students, faculty, and staff, unless it's a safety or core activity that requires shorter distance. So it should be a rare and extent. So I'll give you an example of what that core activity might be. A teacher is teaching and a student is stuck and they don't understand, so the teacher comes closer to help provide a little more guided one-on-one instruction. Once they deliver that, they then go back to their 6 feet distance. So the reality is, right now, we're required to have masks and social distance at 6 feet at all times. Here's some other restrictions that are really difficult at the moment. On the buses, we have to be 6 feet apart or one per seat, one student per seat up against the window. Well, under that provision, we can only bus Brian Nolan, maybe 20 or 22 students. Thank goodness our parents are transporting a lot of them and we're under a hybrid model. Under a full return, we couldn't bus students any longer. We would not have the capacity based on these guidelines we have to follow. Another one is meal consumed on site. Kids have to be 6 feet apart. They take their mask off. It's in the guidance, they have to be. If everyone was here, we wouldn't have the space to do lunch. We just wouldn't. And so when people ask, right, the vaccinations are here, things are heading in the right direction, can we fully reopen now? We can't even have that conversation until the state level changes these guidelines. The 6 feet and a mask, the busing provisions, and the meal provisions. Those are the primary things that keep districts our size, even a little smaller than us, and bigger in a hybrid model. Some of the really small schools that are fully back, even some that border us, they have class sizes in the 9 or 10 range to begin with. We don't, and we don't have that luxury. So what we do know is almost all of our staff who wants vaccines, they have appointments now. And we're really thankful for that. Really, it's almost 500 out of 731 staff members, we believe, based on our data, could be higher. Some of those appointments aren't until March, some of the first doses at some of the pods, maybe in the Carrier Dome and or the fairgrounds or places like that. We're being told the vaccine is 95% effective, but can vaccinated people still carry and transmit the virus? I don't think we know. I don't feel comfortable answering that at this point. We're really unsure of whether or not we can fully reopen this year. I think it's probably unlikely, but I would not close the door on it. But so much changes in such a short period of time. But what we also need to know is it all depends on really the governor's regulations first. If he were to change those regulations, then we need to survey our staff, students, and parents. What is their tone and tenor? What are their sentiments around this? How are they feeling? What's their readiness level? And then can we make a schedule work? Usually building a schedule takes almost all summer. We built the schedule in response to this in just over 2 weeks. And that was people dedicated strictly to scheduling with no school in session. We have school in session. And so how long would it take to rebuild a schedule while we're also trying to service school in session? Those are all things we don't know. Extracurricular involvement could prove that school is safe, and it could lead to more loosening of regulations. So we know the so-called high-risk sports have begun. In fact, we have some competitions happening today. Let's see how that goes. If there's no uptick in COVID outbreaks or isolations or quarantines, maybe that tells us that it is safe and it might be okay to start loosening some regulations. You know, it'll be interesting to watch. And I think there's a lot of attention being paid to the performing arts right now. You know, right now they have to operate 12 feet distance for chorus and band, myself included, many others. I actually have a meeting with some local legislators Friday with Greg Kane, our lead music teacher, Webster's lead music teacher, who's also a resident here in Canandaigua, and Webster's superintendent, to talk about these ideas. We talked about it last week with some legislators. So if we could get some leniency in the performing arts, can that be done and not see an uptick in COVID? And so if these things happen, it only proves that school can do it safely and effectively, and maybe ought to look at different regulations as we move forward. But regardless, no matter what, it's our duty to try to find ways to provide more opportunities for kids. We've done the Braves bonus days at the middle school and the academy. We were set to kick those off at the primary school and elementary school last week, but we had a snow day. They are set to be kicked off this week. And so we're expanding that. And I'll show you some academic data during another presentation that might point to maybe that's having an effect for kids. We expanded classes in the special ed program. We've brought back more students 4 days a week in different grade levels who have special education needs. And so we'll continue to look at those things. What else? We're in some very initial brainstorms and conversations around, do we do spring break academic camps? Do we do evening school or summer programming expansion? Partnering with the YMCA, for example, again, we're already authorizing and working towards that. And so there's a lot of things we're trying to do to build capacity, even if we can't fully reopen. So I threw a lot at you there. And I want to continue to update you on our COVID numbers, our vaccination progress. A little bit later on, we'll share our academic data in another presentation. But if you're not hearing it already, you're likely going to start hearing from community members that do believe we should be fully reopened 5 days a week. And I think it's important to note that there's also community members that they don't know that they're comfortable with that shift yet. You know, they think the hybrid is safe and they have a comfort level there. And we have some that have picked virtual. And so no matter what we do, just whatever I decide at the end, I'll certainly say it that way, is not going to make everybody happy. And it's not a fun position to be in. But before we can even consider anything different than what we're doing now, things must change with the state regulations. Otherwise, we're kind of at a stalemate. This is where we are. And so I'll stop talking now. I'll stop sharing my screen. So that way, if anybody does have questions, I'll attempt to answer them as best I can.
Questions or comments from the board? Okay. Well, Jen.
So Jamie, I would just like to hear some of your thoughts. The COVID-19 committee talked about this a little bit at the end of last week when we get together. It seems to me that some of the things that we will be supporting as we move into high-risk sports present some opportunities for exposure that are not equal across music or even putting kids in the classroom. So you can't put a kid in the classroom less than 6 feet and you can have a mask, but if I'm running a high-risk sports team, I certainly am going to put them less than 6 feet apart for more than 15 minutes. So to me, there needs to be a discussion on this discrepancy of some of the New York State requirements. Thoughts?
There's an ongoing discussion around that. In fact, Julianne and Beth with our meetings with Senator Helming, Assemblyman Gallahan, these points were raised, that there is a great disparity between those. I actually did one of, I haven't done them all year long, but we just kicked them off again today, the FARS Fireless Fireside Chat with some of our musical students, and we talked about some of these discrepancies and things like that. It's tough, and I joked with the students today, kind of, we literally have kids that are wrestlers that will wrestle, and then they can't come and sing unless they're 12 feet away from everybody else. It doesn't seem to match up. The only thing I can say, and this is not my stance per se, but what I hear is, extracurriculars are choice. Whereas some of these things we're talking about in school, are music, for example, are credit bearing. And so they're not necessarily choice. And so maybe that's where a little bit of the reluctance is. But I don't disagree with you at all. I think there is a great disparity. And in fact, tonight was the first time I saw on some social media push towards our local legislators that the governor needs to consider the 6 feet in the classroom rule. Maybe it's just masks are a must. But I'll tell you, that's going to make a lot of people very uneasy.
Mm-hmm.
Jen?
So one other thing that the committee talked about that I think bears some discussion across the state is the idea that in college, for high-risk sports, we have to test team members to allow them to play those sports. Yet that isn't a requirement in K-12. So that means that I could have a senior playing the high-risk sport in Canandaigua, gets no testing. 3 months later, that student shows up in college, and that same kid would need to be tested routinely to be on that sport.
So I reached out to the Department of Health. I actually wanted to do that. I wanted to test students on competition days and coaches. And the Department of Health reached out to the New York State Department of Health, and the New York State Department of Health said the rapid tests are not authorized to be used for those purposes. I would love to do that. The issue is we probably could find them where we could purchase them. When I've looked into it, I was originally told they were $5 each. The ones I found are actually $15 each. And knowing how many, it's a decision you have to make. If we're the only school doing it, that's the other piece. If we're the only school doing it, does it really do anything for us or not? Stuff I struggle with every day.
If we're the only school doing it, it's not worth the time to do it because we're not playing ourselves. We're playing other teams. What is interesting is those rapid tests are allowed at the college level.
Maybe that's where we need some advocacy. To me, it makes all the sense in the world. We could be identifying students that may be asymptomatic or staff walking around, or we could be demonstrating that the infections aren't there at all. And this is actually safe. Either way, we win. And I agree. I would love to do it.
And one last thing, the rapid tests certainly aren't as accurate as a PCR test, swab test, but it's better than no test at all. And the fact that you can do it rapidly means you could do it more often. So the more you do it, the more accurate it is.
Any other questions or comments? Beth?
I just wanted to say that until I met with 6 legislators last week, I didn't realize that most people don't understand that we are under this 6-foot rule, and that honestly, it doesn't matter what our best intentions are. We physically cannot bring kids back under these rules. And the people I was talking to was like, what do you mean? And, like Jamie said, there are places that are pretty close to us that are back, and nobody has, I don't want to say nobody, the powers that be haven't figured out that that's because they just have a smaller volume of kids to begin with. So I think the more we can, share that with pretty much anybody, the better we might all be singing the same song.
Thanks, Beth. I plan to actually use a lot of this in Friday's communication, just as kind of a teach piece, so people understand why we are where we are and what we need to be looking out for.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Do you have anything else for us, Jamie?
No, that's plenty.
Carlin, welcome.
So there's actually a lot more going on right now. We just did the orange crushes. We were putting those together to safely hand out and sanitize. So we're putting them all together today, so then they're safe for tomorrow. For Valentine's Day, and a lot of people we tried to do it, and a lot of people actually participated in it. So it's good to see some student activity going on. We also had some people from our student government go to a conference last weekend, a free conference for some training and some new ideas to bring into the school. So hopefully we'll be using some of those things to help get students more involved with each other. Skis team and the swim team have their sectionals this week. The ski team has their sectionals tomorrow, and I think we have around 5 or 6 people going, and they all are seated to do pretty well, so that's exciting. Our swim team's doing our sectionals on Wednesday, and we have 16 swimmers going, so that's really huge, and it's really exciting. My little brother's on the team, so it's the musical, we've finally got pretty much this week we've started actually doing things on it. I've got more information today because I was there working on choreography with Shaman, and it's called Misbehaving in the 20s. And so basically we're recording everything in small groups. We're going to we recorded all the auditions, and superintendent's daughter was helping with some interviews when that audition process was happening as well. And it's going to be kind of a recording the auditions and then kind of seeing, like, through the director's mindset, how he's envisioning it would be performed. So it'll cut from my understanding, it'll cut from part of the audition tape of someone singing or something like that into a group doing a solo or a group doing a duet or a dance number and things like that. So today they started bringing in different people to work on those individually. And we also started working on choreographing with a small group of people to get that set. So that's really exciting. So we're doing that all safely. And along with the sports opening up too, there's been a lot of buzz about that within the student body. A lot of people are really excited about that, especially with the start of the new semester. I think it'll help a lot of, at least student athletes, keep on track with their grades, which is a little bit important. So it's important, it's good to see that happening. And I think everyone right now is excited to see where we're going to go with the second semester. So a lot of good stuff going on.
Great. That was probably the most exciting report of quite some time. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing all of that. Really appreciate it. Let's see, we have board minutes up for approval. I'll ask for motions, please. Jen and Milton, questions or comments? All in favor? Opposed? That carries unanimously, Deb. And our strategic plan winter update. There you are, Matt.
I'm here. That's us. Mr. Farr, would you like me to share my screen to start, or how would you like to?
I can share it if you're okay with that.
Go ahead.
I'm all set up for it.
All right, let's do it.
Everybody see that okay?
Yes.
All right, so this will be mostly Matt speaking, but let me just kind of start strategic planning. As you know, we went through a whole revision of our strategic plan. We have this nice document that shows our vision, one community transforming lives, our mission, enrich, explore, and empower, our district values, and within those 3 values, the learning community and whole child development, there's things in there that we value. And then beyond that, we have our goals. And so ideally, what would be happening is we have these district level goals that would be supported by the building level and departments, grade levels. And then right now there's individual learning plans that every one of our administrators has to support our advancement of these goals. Everyone's working consistently towards the same goals, values, metrics, and using the same formats. We're not perfectly there yet. This little thing called COVID came in as we were rolling all of this out, but we are still pushing forward. We are still moving in this direction. And I feel like we've done a lot of things this year that actually perfectly support our goals. So if you don't remember, we have 4 primary goals: to enhance our organizational systems and always improve teaching and learning, to continuously improve our district operations, to cultivate an equitable and inclusive school environment, and then to continue to expand opportunities. And so Matt will talk about what we've done this year to kind of directly advance those goals. And then I'll come back and talk about how we're doing this year academically. So Matt, back to you.
Thank you, Jamie. Good evening, everyone. So as Jamie just reviewed for us, we do have our 4 strategic goals. If you recall in the fall, we started the year talking about some of the different initiatives, and we heard from each one of the building principals and some of our directors about some of the specific initiatives underneath each one of these 4 goals. Tonight's presentation is an update about where we are at the winter point of the school year. And so a lot of the activities that you see here are a direct result of us trying to be responsive to what we're seeing from our students, while still maintaining our building plans and still maintaining the focus on these 4 goal areas. So tonight's presentation will talk a little bit about what's happening from the Office of Instruction. So there are some more district-wide pieces that are occurring, but still some progress updates from each one of the buildings. I certainly won't go through each one of the bullet points. If you recall in the fall, each one of the principals took the time to talk about bullet by bullet by bullet for every single one of the different initiatives they're focused on, which is appropriate because they're really proud of the work that they're doing. But a lot of these bullet points simply highlight and serve as an extension of what's already occurring. So for, of course, our first goal, first and foremost, about improving teaching and learning, you can see a range of activities on this first slide. You'll notice that there's some pretty overarching trends on all the slides, but this first one really encapsulates a lot of what's occurring, and that's that responsiveness to what we're seeing from students. We spent a lot of time this summer trying to evaluate and anticipate where there could be some potential gaps for students, knowing that we went through the closure period from March to June. And so a lot of the different pieces here are either the direct result of some of the information we've encountered. So for example, there's continued curriculum work. You'll see a variety of different resources and training that we've provided to students in the areas where we were anticipating deficits, such as reading and phonemic awareness, all the way up to thinking about math. And Jean McKenzie working with the interventionist to seek the opportunity to have some additional professional learning through a math recovery grant, which we not only have been awarded once, but pursuing a second opportunity to be able to be awarded additional training through the program that she was able to get some real explicit training for our intervention staff. And then we're trying to be strategic in other places where we're using our tech integrators to improve and enhance the quality of instruction at the middle school, or trying to be strategic with our physical education staff and ingraining digital citizenship, which is obviously taking on a new form as we're having the students engage in instruction in some form, either virtually or remote for the entire district. It's kind of taken on a new meaning. But we can't lose sight of some of the important instruction around digital citizenship, as the state has recently released computer science standards in addition to thinking about digital literacy for our students. And we were well ahead of the game as a district with our own skills map, but we have some future work to do in this area to align the state document to our own. And as Jamie highlighted in the opening, we're continuing to find ways to get students more connected to school with our Braves bonus day and additional instructional time for students to engage at least in instruction and work on Wednesdays. So that really highlights a lot of the main focus areas for goal 1. So Jamie, if you can go to the second slide, please, for goal 2. And again, some similar themes here. We're trying to think about ways in which we can continuously improve district operations, trying to streamline certain processes. One bigger picture component, again, working across buildings, is trying to figure out how we can enhance certain processes with academic intervention services, multi-tiered systems of support. And you'll see that in a variety of different buildings, we're trying to align and streamline those processes so they're more directly meeting the needs of students. And at the time that we're spending as professionals to problem solve in these areas for students' academic or social emotional needs, that we're being more strategic and streamlined with how that looks, but we're also getting better at documenting and progress monitoring students as we try a variety of strategies to help close gaps where they might exist. And then we're, in terms of trying to communicate with families, we'll hear actually in our next board meeting an update from Caroline Chapman about trying to be more strategic with communication. We really walk a fine line of trying to make sure that we are communicating enough information to families, but we certainly are conscious of not over communicating and inundating. And I think we're still trying to find a sweet spot with that. We kind of err on the side of let's make sure we get information out to folks, but not for the intent to overwhelm. So a lot of our building functions, we've tried to find ways to be more, again, streamlined and strategic, and I think that's leading to continuous improvement. Outside of that, we're still working, Brian Nolan is working directly with Vern and Seth on all things with needs of transportation, PPE. And then, of course, we're all aware of the Central Receiving Center construction that's ongoing and hopefully will be completed by May 4th. That'll be another example of outside of the academic realm, ways we're trying to streamline and improve district operations. So Jamie, goal number 3, please. And this is a big piece. This took on a whole different level of importance as we went through last spring into the summer and started this school year with trying to cultivate an equitable and inclusive school environment. When we had this goal initially at the outset of last school year, it meant different things to different people, but as time has passed, it's certainly taken on a whole new level of importance and is just as important as anything else in relationship to teaching and learning, because without this, it becomes even more difficult to try to have an environment where students can learn successfully. So you'll see a range of activities. Of course, we talked about things more recently with trying to include things such as restorative practices at the middle school, for example. But we know that Vern Tenney is facilitating our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee and doing a lot of great work on that front. But we're not only learning as a district, but as a leadership team. And so we're trying to find places and spaces to continuously come back to this as an important learning goal for ourselves in order to advance the work. But you'll also notice things at the Academy, for example, where a student-generated survey was intended to try to help assess students' perspective on just how equitable and inclusive the school environment is. There's a lot of good information that came from that I know that the administrative team at the Academy is currently poring over in order to help try to determine next steps and ways to try to help enhance that equitable and inclusive school environment. Our final goal, Mr. Barr, please. This should come as no surprise because I know as a district, this is something we certainly pride ourselves on, and we really haven't rested to try to figure out, previously as we think about last school year, we tried to figure out how we can continue on certain traditions and keep kids connected. So whether it was graduation or the egg drop, I mean, everything we try to think about ways to continue to keep students connected to some of the things that they're used to doing. But we obviously got creative with some of those things. And a lot of this holds true this year as well. We've talked pretty widely about the additional day on Wednesdays, but as Jamie mentioned in the opening, that hasn't stopped us from thinking about, can we access time over the breaks? Might we consider using time in the evenings, et cetera, to try to help kids stay connected to school? But we also know that these opportunities are, for a lot of kids, what really helps them stay connected to school. As Carlin pointed out, there's a buzz now of some of the things that we haven't seen as much of in the past. And I think that's a huge thing for students, that they're not just at school for academics, but there are the social and extracurricular activities that we know help our kids have a successful school experience. So many of the things listed here, we're starting to, again, try to think differently about how to engage kids in these different opportunities while still, trying to adhere to the different parameters that, that are asked of us to maintain. So a lot of work has gone into these 4 goal areas. So I think the big question that, Jamie's going to talk to us about here in a bit is, to what extent is all of this work then translating to our student experience in terms of their academic performance? And so I'll turn things over to Jamie to help lead us through that conversation.
There we go. Thanks, Matt. So how are we doing for this school year? I guess is the question we'll tackle a little bit now, and we're looking at the data a bit here. So let's just jump right in. The first slide I want to talk a little bit about is attendance, student attendance rate this year versus last year. And what you'll see is the blue line is last year and the red line is this year. And so what you need to know, if a student misses a day, it equates to approximately 7 classes. And so if you look at the first 1 to 5 weeks, and you see this year versus last year is pretty similar. Students missed a little over 2 days on average in the first 5 weeks across the district. But you can see that gap is widening as we go on at the Academy. 6 to 10 weeks. Again, if you consider a day about 7 classes, last year they missed about 2 days, whereas in that time frame, whereas currently now we're a little over 3 days that they're missing. And so this includes the remote days that they're attending. So we do an analytic of, are students logging into their device and how long are they in their device doing work? We're able to see that. And so what you can see is this year at the Academy, kids are missing more school, maybe 1.5 times amount of school as compared to under normal circumstances. Obviously, when you're missing school, it's harder to learn, and it's just, digging a little bit of a hole for the students. That's the academy. Middle school, again, you see a similar trend here. I want to go back to the academy. You see the trend widening a bit, which is concerning. We need to pay close attention to that. But at the middle school, you'll see the gap is widening, but then it starts to close. And one of the things you may or may not know, but that started happening is the middle school team worked closely with Tracy Lindsay to pull analytics as the day is happening. And the staff over there starts calling students during the school day who have not logged in to encourage them to log in, to talk with their parents, to try to get them to engage in the work. And so we're seeing maybe a slight downward trend. So maybe that activity or that action has caused a trend in the right direction. But nonetheless, kids are missing more school under the current model versus the old model. Looking at class averages, again, the blue line is middle school for this chart, and the red line is the academy. If you look at the vertical line right down the middle, this separates last year from this year. And so to the left of the line is last year. And you can look at the averages throughout the quarter in the progress report. So for the first 2 quarters. And then over here, you see averages from this year. And you will see the middle school last year was here and took a drop by about 5 to 6 grade points from year to year so far through the first 2 quarters. The academy going through here last year, the first half of the year, to this point. And what you'll see is that the academy, there was a drop of about 5 points for the first quarter, 4 or 5 points. They've actually narrowed it, and it appears as though the discrepancy between last year at the second quarter and this year is less than 2 points. I believe it was less than 2 points. Yeah, less than 2 points, grade points. So they're closing that gap. Might that have to do with Braves bonus day, middle school and academy? And you'll see here, the blue line and the red line, look at the sharp incline right there. Might that have to do with the Braves bonus day? What we know is we have over 100 kids in each building now signing up for those days that have been going on since before the holiday break. And they know about 80 to 90% of the students that are accessing those days are students who are struggling in some classes. And so they're reaching some of the students that need those days the most. Now, what we wanted to do next is dive into a little bit of the comparative data. And so this is a male and female chart. And what you'll see last year, there was a discrepancy between where the females were scoring on grade level in the male and how the boys were. And then going into this year, you can see that gap widened a little bit between how the boys are doing versus how the girls are doing. The females seem to be doing a little bit better in the remote model versus the boys, but they both declined by a couple points this year versus last year. And so looking at everything you've seen so far, probably not a big surprise. The grades have dipped a bit, but these are overall averages, all students. When you start breaking it down further, it becomes much more alarming. And so this next chart is really our students who are designated as economically disadvantaged versus the ones that are not designated economically disadvantaged. The red line is are the students who are not designated as economically disadvantaged. And you will see at quarter 1, last year, they had a 91 average. This year, 88. Quarter 2, 89.8, 87.8. They might have dropped by a point or 2 year to year. But the students who are designated as economically disadvantaged took a sharp decline. Quarter 1 to quarter 1, 9 points. Quarter 2 to quarter 2, 7 points, but that gap is closing. Again, I'll ask, could this have something to do with those Braves bonus days and getting into a routine? We certainly like this upward trend here, and we want to continue to watch it. But you can see the gap that existed last year is unfortunate. This is unacceptable. And we need to, this is why when we go back to my first part of the presentation, what's so frustrating is the disparity between what districts our size or larger are able to do, where in other districts, they're back 5 days a week because they don't have nearly as many students. And my heart breaks for these students who are struggling. It really breaks for everybody that's stuck in this position, but this is really a sad statistic right here that we need to figure out. The other one is our students with disabilities. So students who have an IEP. If you look at last year, there is a gap. And I should note that our school really does quite well comparatively with students who have an IEP and commencement outcomes. We do really well, but you can see a pretty sizable drop between how kids did last year and then how they're doing this year for students with IEPs. Again, I feel a bit hopeful that there's a climb here. Remember, we have brought more of those programs back to 4 days a week in recent days, in recent weeks. And a lot of these students are utilizing those Braves bonus days as well. And so hopefully these upward trends continue, but it's something we need to pay close attention to. What I'm more concerned about right now is the gap here on those last two slides. This one with the economically disadvantaged and our students with disabilities. And then we took a close look. This one is also concerning. If we look at our students, we don't have a tremendous amount of diversity in the Canandaigua City School District when it comes to race and ethnicity. But if you look at how our white students are performing in comparison to our non-white students, you can see last year versus this year, the gap widened yet again. And so these are all things that we need to continue to pay attention to. And this is why there's a sense of urgency to, if we're not going to be in a position to reopen more fully, what else can we do to help students succeed who are struggling? And we're not going to profess to have any answers, but we certainly are brainstorming and talking about it often. And so that's a lot of data between what Matt shared with you and all the work we're trying to do this year, despite the pandemic, despite our circumstances, and our constant viewing of our data, how we're doing academically, so forth and so on. I didn't share data specific to the primary elementary school. Remember, they grade based on standards-based grading. There is data we could pull from there. I just don't know if it'll be in this presentation format as valuable. If you'd like to see me do that, I certainly could bring that to the next board meeting. I'd be happy to. But I will unshare my screen now in case anybody has questions, and perhaps Matt and I could answer them for you.
Michelle.
Not really a question, but just an observation and the power of data and asking the why questions is what's going to be a differentiator for our district to others. So props to you for looking at that data the way that you did and trying to figure out what the why is, and then what do we wrap around that to support those students.
Great. Milton.
So the data you were using, was that last year's 11th graders and this year's, I'm assuming you were looking at just like 3 years, right? 11 through 9. So you're comparing likes to likes here, you've kicked out those who weren't here or aren't here now.
Right. So we're not comparing the same students last year to this year. It's just the entire building. What are their academic averages? What are their attendance rates? And so, yes, last year's data would have, for example, the juniors, and then this year's would have them as seniors.
Okay. So, I mean, but different courses, right? So, I mean, but the trends I think are telling here. So even though it's not like to like, we still see some trends which are troubling.
Right.
John.
Jamie, we went remote when last year? Was it
March.
March.
Yeah.
I wonder what that data would look like from the last year we were fully in school compared to a year we're fully not in school. Because we got to remember, if you start March onward, that was a crazy to start with.
Yeah, when we extrapolate this data out, we're actually going to have to go back to the previous spring, compare the data to make it anything worth looking at, because the grades for the third and fourth quarter last year, remember, we did a lot of different formulas to tabulate the grades last year.
This
And-
year's comparison very much, it is looking at two different scenarios where school was fully open and we were able to get through the first 2 semesters, typical 5 days a week. The first 20 weeks this year is an indicator about, with this current learning model, what is the impact. So it is showing us a trend of, pretty accurately, of what are the discrepancies between how students performing when they're coming to school 5 days a week versus our current model where some are virtual 4 days a week, or they're coming 2 days and they're remote for 3 other days.
And you didn't differentiate virtual versus the ones that are 2 in, 2 out.
No, but we're going to now.
Well, the other
Yeah.
point, you have people that advocate offering online, even when we can go back. That these numbers, if you were to take these numbers and pull out the ones that were fully online, that may show even a greater gap.
Yeah, I'm going to actually talk to Tracy tomorrow. As we were talking, I thought, yeah, that's a piece of data we need. That'll be telling. So I'll talk to Tracy and we'll have him pull that as well.
Jen?
So John took my first set of questions, but my second question is, can we get some data on how many students may have dropped out or pulled out of the class in middle school or high school, decided not to take a foreign language or whatever? I'm really curious as to what our drop rate is year over year too.
Yes, I think let's talk a little bit more about what you're looking for. For example, we've had some requests for some students to drop some classes at the academy, for example, but we have a board policy, they have to take 6 credits. And so they've been unable to. But certainly we could see maybe students who didn't, well, I know this for sure, some students decided not to do chorus, for example, under this format. And so that sort of data we probably could pull. I just want to make sure when we pull it, it's valuable data. I want to be careful about that.
Yeah, I get that. I'm just curious because anecdotally I hear about students, dropping a classes here and there because they're having trouble keeping up, or it's not what they want. Is for example with chorus and things like that. I'm just curious what that data shows year over year in terms of how many classes our students are engaging in this strange year versus a normal year. So, what does our distribution look like this year versus last year or the year before?
Okay, I think I know what you're looking for. Let me see what I can dig up. Well, let me see what Tracy can dig up.
And then my second question really has something to do with when you say we're tracking how students log in. I'm assuming you're just tracking they've been there or they've not been there in a given day. You're not tracking the amount of minutes or anything like that, or just whether they engaged, right?
Yeah, they need to be logged into their system for a certain amount of minutes for it to click on, but it's not an extended amount of minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Welcome.
Other questions or comments? Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, all the data collectors behind all of it. Let's see, we have a consensus agenda and supplemental. Ask for motions, please. John and Beth, questions or comments? All in favor? Opposed? That carries unanimously. Deb? And let's see, Michelle, will you report out on audit, please?
I certainly will. We had a pretty jam-packed meeting covering a lot of numbers, which we're going to hear more about as we move through time here and get into budget season. A few highlights: those mid-year state aid reductions that we thought might happen, but we were waiting to see if money was actually going to be held back. No good news, no state aid reductions or cuts this year, but there's not a repayment schedule yet. So shocker, right? So we're in sit tight mode on that. Transportation aid, we do expect a reduction in transportation aid. we don't get aid when we're not transporting students, even if we have drivers on standby or try to find other things for them to do. So that's going to be a hit to us, which is unfortunate. We also expect some reductions in aid for students with special needs, particularly around the use of aids. So if we have aides employed, but they're not actually in one-to-one situations like they're designated as, that's not aidable. Correct, Matt? Just do a little nod if I'm saying that right. Okay, good. So it's really tough in remote learning situations, and obviously this impacts BOCES and some of our in-district students. So something that we're paying attention to, and we're not really sure how big of a hit this is going to be for us. So we're watching that carefully. We expect foundation aid to be flat for the third straight year. If we do get some money in from the CARES Act, which we expect, the state is likely to just offset that money. So really what we're looking at as we move not into this year and next year, but as we get closer to the 22-23 school year is when we're really looking at a cliff that we're going to have to figure out some ways to manage. Another interesting thing the state is doing, I guess to be creative, we're not really sure why, is they're trying to combine a whole bunch of aid categories into one category called service aid. That covers everything from transportation aid to BOCES aid to bus purchases. The problem with that is we don't get a growth factor on that. So we give up, for example, a 2% growth factor, which is problematic. So there is advocacy that is happening with that to try to not have those aids all be combined. Ultimately, what we're talking about is what I call people and programs, right? That's where the impact will be felt because we don't have too many different strings we can pull to balance our budget. So on a more positive note, we are with the future projections for next year, we are expecting about $1 million increase. That's all nearly BOCES aid though. So you know, which will take any increase we can get, but there's repercussions to that. This will likely shake out, and Matt, we can't put this in blood at this point, but we're looking at a tax cap around 2%, which is going to be really tough in terms of what to expect going forward. So we need some help at the federal level for sure. And at the federal level, from the perspective of we get that money, but the state doesn't take it back. So that is the audit report. A little bit more serious these days, but we carry on.
You do. Thanks, Michelle. I think the other thing I remember and sort of noted from that meeting was that the last time we hit the cliff, we had some ability to right size, and we no longer can do that. We are right sized. And so, you know, the cliff will be really hard to confront, but as you said, we carry on, and we carry on with the best people in place to do it for us. So thank you. Let's see, policy, Beth.
Just a quick motion on behalf of the committee. It's a second reading to remove policy 3250, student directory information, because it's now repetitive with a new policy that we passed either the last meeting or 2 meetings ago.
Okay, and that needs no second. So I will ask if there are any questions or comments. All in favor? Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you. Character ed?
No report.
Okay, thank you. Did CIE meet? Okay, great. This is going so well. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Did you all meet, Julianne? All right. I think safety, did safety meet?
Of course we did. Somebody's got to work around here. I don't know. Safety did meet. We talked about, looking at the screen with the notes. Elementary school window project almost completed. 436 windows in less than 2 weeks. Phase 1 of our main project is at SCD for final review. We hope to hear back soon on that one. Boiler room work is targeted for the end of May. and our Brian and Mike are talking with the PES administration about planning for that. They're going to be reviewing at our next meeting the district safety plan. We had building reports dealing a lot with snow and ice, questions about whether pencil sharpeners were being emptied daily. We do hit all the important. You know, Michelle, everything isn't about money. Somebody has to empty the pencil sharpeners.
People, programs, and pencils.
Pencil sharpeners. Thank you very much. So it's a very important thing. If it overflows, what do you do? You know, then you've got all sorts of health and safety issues, and we have to get more custodians. Budget goes out of whack. There's a lot of things that can happen. That was safety, but along the lines of what Michelle was saying, I don't know, Jeannie, you might remember, or Brian, we had one project at one point that was shovel ready. Fed money came in a similar situation where they tried to get some money into the economy. We had the shovel ready project, and we were able to take advantage of that. I don't remember which project it was. It was somewhere many moons ago, but I don't know if you guys have heard. Is this federal money they're talking about? Is there going to be any chance that we can use some of that for that current project if we're shovel ready?
I haven't heard anything. I'm not sure if Brian or Matt have, but I have not. Brian does have the golden shovel in his office though, so we can get him ready with it. Brian, have you heard it?
I haven't heard anything either, no.
Right. Is that it, John?
That's it. There was one question that came up, but it wasn't in that meeting, but it was about the snow day and the fact that a lot of people didn't get phone calls. Has there been any talk about fixing that system so you can have more than one phone number get called?
Yeah, so it does. I think you can register up to 2 contacts. Last year it worked perfectly. We're not sure what the glitch was this year, but did they have the issue on the second day, John? Did you hear, or just the first one?
And I, for one, our house phone didn't ring.
Okay.
We get the contact for Karen, but the house phone didn't ring. Her cell phone rang.
Okay.
Last year, and any time up to this point, both phones would ring. Because the cell phone the ringer may be turned off, maybe in the other room, but as long as the house phone rings, we all hear it. Neither one of these calls came through our house phones.
Okay. So Brave Square has an update. Oh, go ahead.
I was just, John, I'm just wondering what a house phone is.
We're the OGs. We have
Yes.
those.
It's a little thing with a dial on it. You spin numbers like this, and you can call people.
And Megan, you put your hand up. Were you?
Yeah. So the first day it called me just fine, and the number that came up that told me it was the school was there, and it was fine. The next day the phone rang and it said potential spam.
Yeah.
So then, no, I don't answer those, so I didn't answer it. And then there was, so I don't know what happened between day 1 and day 2, but the second day I got potential spam. So.
And I think Deb and Dan Bowman worked on that spam designation, and we had to change it was through Verizon, I believe, or someone. Yeah, that should be corrected. We knew some people didn't get the call, and we're working on it. Brave Square is doing this update. I forget the name of it now, Propor or something like that. But essentially, it allows people to make sure and verify that their contact information is up to date and correct, so that we have the up-to-date information. It's in a year's time, people change numbers, unfortunately. I'm not saying, it sounds like some of you didn't have the call and you didn't change numbers. So we'll have to get to the bottom of what's going on there.
Jen?
Jamie, to that end, our house phone, we have one too, did not ring either, but our cell phones did. And it's just as it's always been in the system.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay. Jen, COVID-19? Did you all meet?
Jamie took all of my thunder. There's nothing more to add. He did a great job.
Okay, thank you. Jamie, do you have anything else?
I do not.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Be well. Thank you for being with us tonight. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn, please. Michelle and Milton. Good night, everybody.